Hi, welcome back to another video for Mojave County Airsoft. I'm Mark, and today we're going to be talking about maybe a little bit of a controversial subject, right? Specifically, we're going to be talking about Airsoft, but if you're talking about real steel and you learn something from this, that's fine too. So, the topic today is going to be MLok versus rails. Especially if you're a beginner, it's going to be a little confusing. If you're more experienced, you already got your setup and you just want to swap it out and test it, you want to drop that $100 or so on an MLok rail, try it out for yourself. That's all fun and dandy. But today we're mostly going to be talking about the budget-minded person or the new person who isn't going to want to drop that money on a rail. So there's a couple things you're going to want to consider. First of all is going to be budget. Like I said, MLoks for some reason more expensive. Maybe it's machining. I don't know. I don't make MLoks, so I don't make rails in general. So I don't know on that. Maybe it's machining, but for some reason it does tend to be more expensive from what I've seen so far in the airsofting community. In the real steel community, maybe that's true, maybe that's not. It's really probably going to come down to manufacturer. So if you can get the same gun, one has MLok, one has Picitany, that's going to be up to you on how much you want to spend, right? Because I would pick the cheaper of the two guns personally, if everything else is the same. So the first thing is budget. I wouldn't say that MLok is anything to spend more for unless you're a milsim guy and you're looking for a specific thing, a specific look to your rifle, or if they're the same price, maybe go with MLok, maybe don't. And there are a few other things we should talk about. The next thing is going to be weight, right? A properly made aluminum nice rail system for, let's take an AR for example, because they're most prevalent, right? Rail systems are going to be more heavy, right? MLok is fairly light. It's a much thinner material, so it's going to be lighter. Generally, you're going to have lightning cuts along it as well. So it's going to be even lighter than that. But that is something to consider. And especially when you're talking about taking your rifle and going from low ready, you're fighting gravity, you're going to have to pull it up. However, if you come mostly from high port going down, maybe you won't notice as much of a difference because gravity is helping you do that. So that's going to be up to you, how you personally prefer to operate. So weight is going to be a big factor. Younger players or smaller players, maybe less physically fit players, you might want to go with MLok because it is going to be, generally speaking, lighter. Now that being said, it comes down to material as well. Something like this is real thin. It's made out of good quality material. It's from PSA, Palmetto State Armory. So this is off my real rifle or pistol because ATF, but whatever. So this is well made and it's very light. However, if this is made of pot metal, if you're looking at two rails, same length, let's go 10.5. If we're talking about two 10.5 rails, the MLok made of a pot metal material, a crappy metal material, and the rail system, the Picitany rail system, made out of aluminum. The aluminum one might be lighter. So that's something to be consider as well. If you're comparing two plastics, same thing. MLok's probably going to be lighter. If you're comparing two pot metals, MLok's probably going to be lighter. Two aluminums, MLok's probably going to be lighter. That's kind of the theme, right? MLok's lighter. But if you're comparing a plastic traditional rail system to a hot metal MLok rail system, plastic's going to be lighter, so that's something to consider as well. One benefit that MLok almost always has as well is that it is almost always free float. You might not care about that. Personally, if I'm grabbing and wrenching the gun, especially if I have a plastic receiver like on this one, the barrel being connected to the barrel means that I'm going to flex it off to one side, which might not happen with a free float barrel. Now, if you have metal receivers on all your stuff, that's going to be different, right? So that's something to consider as well. Now, on terms of budget, we'll talk about attachments, right? Obviously, you got your rail up top, which this one has a flashlight mounted to it in a 45 position, so that way when I come up with my offhand, because I am a left-handed rifle shooter, so this is fit for my right hand. I know I'm mirrored, but whatever, deal with it. So it's set at a 45-degree offset, so that way when I'm coming up onto the gun, I can just click it, and I can still maintain that good position on the mag well. So Picitany rail across the top, you're going to want to look for that. If your MLok rail doesn't come with that, I would suggest finding a different rail system, unless you have zero interest in mounting any kind of attachments, but most people want to mount something. Especially when you get into like CQB games, longer games, just night games in general, or anywhere where you might have dark environments, having a flashlight is going to be very handy. Also, I've heard some people like to blind their opponents with them before they shoot them. I think that's a little bit silly, but whatever. I think personally, if I'm presenting a flashlight on the person, I can also pull the trigger on the person. So if I'm doing it at the same time, maybe that's one thing, but if I'm clicking on the flashlight and then pulling the trigger, that's just a waste of time in my opinion. But, so on the note of attachments, this has quad rail, right? So it's a work in progress. We'll be talking about that when the rest of the parts show up. So that one has a quad rail, which means that it's going to be easier to find grips. It's going to be easier to find pecs or other laser light combos. It's going to be easier to find maybe 45-degree offsets or what have you, that so you can mount lights or lasers or whatever you want to mount to it at different angles. There are a lot more attachments. You can find those used a lot easier for Picitany. You can find them on sale a lot easier for Picitany. There's just so many more options. Whereas for MLok, they're starting to roll out and they're catching up, and maybe this video won't age well, and in another 5 years, people looking back on it, if someone stumbles across it, it's going to be like, well, all the attachments are MLok now. That might happen. But as of right now, when I'm making the video, MLok is definitely not as common now. They do sell attachments, but that's another thing you're going to need to buy. So maybe you save money on the rail system. Let's call it $100 versus, I just dropped that, $100 versus, let's say, $80 or $80 for the MLok, $100 for the rail system. But if you then have to go buy 4 MLok to Picitany adapters so you can mount your attachments on it, then you're going to be spending more money on the in the long run on MLok. As far as some other things to consider, something that's not as prevalent in Airsoft because we don't have to deal with recoil control, but maybe you're playing in the rain, maybe your hands are sweaty, whatever the case is. Traditional rail systems are definitely a lot more grippy. A lot of people like to add the rubber or the plastic covers on them. I've never really felt the need for it. I like the way it fits my hand naturally. And if it's a well-made rail system, it's not going to have sharp edges. So no matter where you grab it, you're not going to cut your hand open. But it is going to be nice and grippy, so I can hold that rifle more steady. And if I am, let's say, doing CQB stuff, let's say it's raining, hands are sweaty, maybe they're covered in paint if I'm playing a paintball field and I touch the wrong thing. I don't know. But your natural grip or glove grip on a Picitany is going to be a lot more sure, right? So transitioning, going from high port, it's going to be a lot more sure. You can control the rifle really well. Whereas with most MLok systems that I've tried out, especially when they get the nice coatings on them, your hands tend to slide off, right? It wouldn't happen with Picitany. So, you know, if you're using it as a training tool, if you're using Airsoft as a training tool, maybe you're going hands-on with the person, you might want to retain it. You know, if you're playing in the rain, you don't want to slip off. Or if you're just moving quick, maybe you've got a short rail system like this, muzzle's right there, and you go into a, from high port down into ready, maybe your hand slides off and in front of the muzzle. Not saying that's always going to happen. Obviously, you can get rail pieces for hand stops and things like that, but I think that's an inherent good point about the standard rail system. Another thing to touch on is looks, right? Yes, tier 1, whatever you want to call them, you know, Delta guys, DevGru guys, yeah, they're switching over to the Mark 18 Block 3s or whatever you want to call them, Mod 2 Block 3, whatever, which do have the Geissele rail system, the USGI rail system and upper, or styled upper. So maybe you want to go for that kind of look. But for most Airsoft impressions, although a lot of people do tend to go high speed with it, a lot of people are also going standard military with it. So having a rail system means that I can go to most milsims, and with a change of camis, maybe some other gear, I can go jump in with the Task Force Keg guys, like the Gun Gamer group talks about, who do the 10th Mountain stuff. I can do, if I have a free float, that's an easy Mark 18 build, which is what that's turning into. Like I said, I'm waiting on some extra parts. You know, I can go do other milsim things and it fits the look a lot better. It doesn't look as like competition civilian kind of gun as MLok does. Like I said, a lot of the high speed units are switching over. There's the new 416 as well that has MLok, so that's something to think about depending on your impression. But yeah, so I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover. If you have any other questions, comments, concerns, put them down in the comments. All these things are just my opinions. Personally, I'm going to pick a traditional rail system for Airsoft and probably MLok for real steel. I actually do have an MLok rifle coming in for Airsoft, so we'll see if my opinions change in the future. Maybe I'll have to do a follow-up video. But for right now, I'm sticking with my traditional rails. With that being said, stay tuned for more videos in the future, and stay safe and stay hydrated.